I have watched Exelon Wind developing wind projects across Michigan, even as their CEO was stating publicly that natural gas-fired electricity is the most cost-effective means of reducing emissions, bar none. I have watched Spanish utility Iberdrola's CEO lobby for reducing wind and solar subsidies in Europe as being destructive to the integrity of the grid and the markets. Yet their sales agents in Ohio argue in favor of preserving similar policies. But what I have not seen Iberdrola's U.S. sales team talk about is the $1 billion in U.S. profits they strip mined from the U.S. Treasury and exported back to Spain in just 1 year. I have seen Duke Energy sign a wind lease with a township supervisor in Michigan who claimed it was not a conflict of interest for that supervisor then to create legislation that would make that project possible and therefore his profits. And when that man was removed by legal force, he became Duke Energy's sales agent in that same township. That township later asked Duke to leave with a vote of 71 to 29 at the ballot box. This is a critical point. Despite wind energy's alleged purpose, I have never seen a wind developer show that adding wind to an existing portfolio like Ohio's is the low-cost means of avoiding emissions. In fact, it is nearly 10 times the price per unit of CO2 avoided than replacing coal generation with combined cycle, as Dr. Taylor alluded to. Could that be why they instead prefer to talk about green jobs and economic development? Is because they fail the only test that actually matters, the price per unit of emissions avoided? And with respect to green jobs creation, we're seeing this in Michigan. Legislators and policymakers alike fall for the green jobs claim while never realizing the jobs wind promoters are most concerned with are their own. I have watched NextEra Energy claiming to be green receive so much benefit from the wind PTC that they pay essentially no income tax on their vast fossil fuel generation fleet, even as they build the world's largest gas-fired generator in the heart of the environmentally sensitive Everglades. In fact, the entrance to the gas plant is only 1,000 feet from the entrance to the Everglades Preserve. I've heard wind promoters tell Michigan policymakers that they can win the wind race by increasing wind mandates and that they do not want to lose out to states like Iowa. But I have never heard them tell the rest of the story, that Iowa's renewable energy mandate was only 105 megawatts, that's a typo, and was fulfilled long ago, and that despite more than 20% wind penetration in Iowa, coal emissions have risen every year and are not expected to drop, according to Mid-American, until their coal generation is replaced with gas. I'm not here to front for gas. Like Dr. Taylor said, we only have a few options, and as Robert Bryce once said, if you're anti-coal, anti-gas, and anti-nuclear, then you are pro-darkness. We only have those three options. I've observed the WIA telling Ohio that by preserving or even increasing the RPS mandates that they can become a national leader in green jobs creation, and I have seen them tell that same love story to Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, New York, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. It appears to me that WIA is a very fickle lover. I've witnessed wind developers tell Ohio policymakers that wind is a cost-effective means of generating electricity despite being far more expensive than wind from the prairie states. The question is begged, cost-effective for whom? Michigan does not suppress the value of our wind power purchase agreements. Ohio, they're hard to get to the numbers. Michigan's aggregate average right now is $80 per megawatt hour. We're locked into those prices for 20 years. Iowa wind right now can be bought for $30. Even if you like renewable energy, you have to ask, is it in your ratepayers' interest to pay 2.5 times what it's worth? I've heard wind developers talk about wind energy being grid competitive in some markets while never once stating what is undeniably true. The bulk of that energy is generated at times of low demand and thus has a value of far less than $35 per megawatt hour. And often these same wind generators actually pay the grid to take their unneeded energy as the taxpayers make them whole. I've observed that we justify their massive subsidy regimen by suggesting that all forms of generation are subsidized, irrespective of the fact that wind subsidies are roughly 80 times the price per megawatt hour of gas and coal. I've witnessed Republican politicians quote free market economist Friedrich von Hayek as a justification for increasing unconstitutional in-state wind energy must-produce, must-purchase cartels. Yet I've also witnessed Democratic politicians attack fossil fuel monopolies for their corporate oppression of the common man, while ignoring those same loathsome behaviors by those same fossil fuel entities as they construct irresponsibly engineered wind projects with their onerous impacts upon humans, wildlife, and the social fabric of our rural communities. I have watched WIA operatives attack citizens who assemble to protest wind energy mandates as being secretly funded by some dark fossil fuel interest, even as they jetted to Midwest energy summits on the largesse of E.ON, AEP, Florida Power Light, and Iberdrola, fossil I've read statements by OEA's Michael Goggins. He speaks in glowing terms about how the U.S. has a world-class wind resource compared to Europe, while neglecting the fact that regionally, NREL shows that Ohio's wind resource is poor or marginal and is far more expensive than Iowa, Minnesota, or North Dakota. And of course, Mr. Goggins did not immediately rush to Europe and say, stop your wind mandates, you have a very non-competitive wind resource. I've watched promoters of wind like Sierra Club oppose fracking, while OEA and CanWEA promote the replacement of coal and nuclear with gas plus wind, while claiming that the obviously increased use of gas generation in that scenario would somehow keep gas prices down. I've read articles by the Farm Bureau favoring wind subsidies and mandates, yet I have taken calls personally from farmers in tears as they beg me to find a legal means to escape their predatory wind lease. It's my understanding that Iberdrola has offered a lease in some regions that is extendable for 180 years. That seems to be a very long time. We were just developing the steam engine 180 years ago. I've heard Iberdrola claim to be a good neighbor while hearing testimony from those in Paulding and Van Wert counties with respect to cut field tile, road damage, and a turbine base constructed too closely to a gas line in defiance of the Ohio Power Siting Board. I saw pictures of the base later removed with mechanical means. I've heard wind developers state with a straight face that yes, of course, 150-foot tall power transmission lines are known to affect property values, but 494-foot tall turbines 1,000 feet from your bedroom have no statistical effect upon home values. My question to them is that because wind turbines spin and make noise, that they have no effect on property values? I've seen a wind developer's noise consultant approve 1,000-foot turbine to home setbacks in Michigan, despite having testified in Vermont that similar turbines would cause negative health impacts from more than a mile away. This is the kind of duplicity we encounter in a regular fashion on the receiving end of PA 295 and SB 221. I have heard countless wind developer acoustic experts, as Mr. Rand alluded to, testify that wind turbines are no noisier than a conversation, a refrigerator, or even a quiet library, only to have people inside those developments later resort to building noise bunkers, taking sleep medication, or home abandonment to escape the turbine noise. I've heard wind developers claim those examples are outliers, yet every major wind development in Michigan, and we have about twice the installed capacity as you do right now, has experienced those effects, including 73 folks that signed a petition asking that the 12 turbines in Delta County be turned off due to the noise. If you go through Paulding and Van Wert and wish to talk to people there, you must remember, with all those good neighbor agreements, the only people that complain about wind turbine noise are those who can. The vast majority of them have signed a lease prohibiting their complaints. We have a man in Mason County, Michigan, who signed an agreement with Consumers Energy for $100 that reduced the setback for this 476-foot tall turbine to only 950 feet. He has fled to his home in the Upper Peninsula, says my place has become the worst place on earth to live. But he does get $100 a year from Consumers Energy. I have witnessed wind developers claim capacity factors of 30, 35, and 40%. They're even projecting 47% in Michigan now. Yet neither state has ever achieved an average of even 30%. I've watched wind developers claim that their study found no endangered Indiana bats near a proposed wind project near my home, but an Eastern Michigan University biologist has just studied those non-existent bats for 3 years. I've heard OEA suggest that wind subsidies made possible by taxpayers somehow reduce the price of electricity for ratepayers. Has no one told them that the ratepayers and taxpayers are in fact the same people? I've seen wind promoters claim that wind energy is now grid competitive and has dropped from $90 to $50 and subsidies are no longer needed, even as they urge Congress to extend the wind PTC, all wind development will stop. I've heard Michigan wind developers claim to be environmentally friendly while building 3 wind projects within 3 miles of the Great Lakes shoreline in direct defiance of Fish and Wildlife Service's recommendations. We have the letters on our website. I've read articles stating that the wind PTC needs to be extended for the sake of the climate, even as the National Academy of Sciences reports that the net effect of the PTC is perhaps a 0.3% reduction in CO2 and is a very expensive means of avoiding CO2 compared to alternative solutions. I have heard wind proponents like OEA say that wind energy is a wise investment in a cleaner tomorrow, yet Michigan now has spent $2.5 billion on wind energy plus transmission that has created an effective capacity of only 250 megawatts out of an annual average statewide of 12,700. That can never retire a single coal plant. That same price, that same $2.5 billion spent on combined cycle gas turbines would have closed 50% of Michigan's coal fleet, slashed fine particulates of mercury by 50% because gas does not emit those in any significant quantity, and cut our statewide emissions of CO2 by 25%. I've stood by and listened as wind promoters in Ohio and Michigan both concede that in-state wind generation mandates are likely unconstitutional, but since no one has yet initiated legal action, who cares? Well, North Dakota and Minnesota are in that litigation even as we speak, and my group has gone to the Attorney General in Michigan and asked for them to take action on behalf of the ratepayers because of the points that Mr. Viscaldi made. So you see, that's what things look like from where I sit. I'm with these people living with these wind mandates every week. The bill before us today is a good start, but in my words, it does not begin to unravel the bizarre world of wind speak, where expensive is cheap, noise like a refrigerator drives people from their homes, predatory wind leases are good for farmers, paying $50 to $100 for Ohio wind energy is better than buying it from Iowa for $30, and it is somehow green to kill bats and raptors with a technology that has only a trivial ability to reduce emissions. We must recognize the policy package that WEA was selling starting in 2005 was never intended to yield tremendous benefits to anyone except their own affiliates. We must recognize that those self-serving benefits come at a substantial loss to the taxpayers and ratepayers who enable their ignoble work. Energy policy is quite literally a matter of life and death. It must not be the playground for armchair environmentalists' latest pet theories. We applaud this very heroic attempt to begin to unwind the economic and environmental absurdity of Ohio's in-state wind mandate, but we ask that this be only the first step in wresting Ohio's energy policy from the hands of ideologues and return it to the realms of science and economics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martis. Appreciate you being here, especially on your time. If Dr. Leonard can return up, and if there are any questions of the remaining, I do have a question. Dr. Lear, I recognize your background is in groundwater technology, but if you can speak on hydropower, if you're able, I understand not only does Canada produce a great bit of hydro, but there's a capability of producing a great deal more, and I'm not talking regionally, I'm talking about the country as a whole.
Well, I'll go back, 50 years ago, we thought the United States would rely on hydropower from Canada for our use, and there was a North American Water Power Coalition that thought they could negotiate the water power from Canada running all through the southwestern United States. It turned out that Canada didn't want to give up all the power that they had. But there's a movement back. Hydropower is really the only renewable energy that actually pays. I mean, the sun creates hydropower. I mean, it's the hydrologic cycle that creates rain and rivers and movement to the oceans and so on. So interesting, hydropower is the only efficient economic renewable energy. And for some reason or other, the enviros don't want to call that renewable energy. And in fact, starting about 25 years ago, they turned against hydropower, and the enviros in many parts of the country have actually been effective in taking down dams to do away with them because they were interfering with fish. That appears to be over. The tables have turned now, and the Wall Street Journal has recently, as yesterday, had a major article in a whole energy section about something like 5,400 dams around the United States that do not have hydropower, could be retrofitted to have hydropower. It appears now that as a nation, we're going to overcome the environmental resistance and look back. Now, the sites for major dams, Bonneville and Hoover Dam, they're gone, but there are many, many smaller dams that can efficiently produce hydropower far better than solar and wind, neither of which are actually possible without government subsidy. So I think there will be a movement back to small-scale hydropower, and maybe someone will find another big site, but it's a good thing. And Canada has, energy to spare, and they will be happy to provide us. I mean, as long as the renewable portfolio standards stand, and as was pointed out by the last speaker, they're really unconstitutional and shouldn't stand. But as long as they do stand, Canada will be happy to provide us, sell us their hydropower at a fraction of wind and solar, if we can allow the entry of the transmission lines across borders. Now, that actually requires, I believe, a presidential signature. That's why we don't have a Keystone Pipeline, because it starts on the Canadian border, and the president has the right to deny it, which he will continue to do so because of his green support. But the potential for getting hydropower from Canada, I think, is exceptionally good.
And it is happening now. Ontario is dumping wind into, or energy into Michigan at night, often at essentially no cost because they have an abundance. Perversely, as their wind generation increases, they too are looking places to get rid of it when there's no demand.
Denmark, which has more, I think, more windmills than any country in Europe, I think they have 54,000. They can't sell the wind energy inside their country because they have cheaper sources, and they're selling it for 25 cents on the dollar a sweep, which is kind of interesting, because you got to get rid of it somehow. You can't store it.
Well, they still make funny looking windows over there, don't they?
Yes, they do. Not exactly male launcher, but they don't have quite the mega. Well, one of the things I wrote in my Wall Street Journal article was that clearly we will be a nation of sculpture garden. But I think if you look at, if you go throughout my past, you see all the windows not operating. It kind of reminds me of giant aliens, landing on the Earth and then being frozen in space.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very much, for being here today for your testimony. We have no further